to all of you. This organization has such a prominent place in my heart. I've learned a lot about it from Taylor. She talks about it a lot and is just so devoted to the organization, but just as much to the recipients and the recipients' families and the trials and tribulations you've all been through. I guess once upon a time, it's probably several years ago, I was at a banquet and a mother of a young man who was killed tragically in an accident met the older man, quite a bit older even than the mother, much less the 18 or 20-year-old young man who died. This young man died and his heart was given to this older man. And I was within earshot. Taylor had told me that this does happen. And my wife and I heard the mother of the young man who had died say to the recipient, would you mind if and he cut her off, immediately almost ripped his shirt off, pulled his t-shirt down, and she leaned down and put her ear on his chest to hear the heartbeat of her son. And anybody within earshot had tears in their eyes pretty quickly. It was so touching, so powerful. And that was a click moment for me, I can assure you. This organization has meant a whole lot to me, but that sort of really hit me hard and made me really appreciate what the organization does, but what you recipients and family members have gone through. And I have such respect and admiration for your courage. Today, I'd like to do several things. I'd like to talk for maybe 20 minutes. I don't know. Taylor probably will start waving her hands and getting the hook if I go on too long, but I'd like to leave some time after I stop for some questions to go into some of these things I talk about a little deeper. I don't know how much experience any of you have had with mental health or chances to get any education or training about that or been in therapy, which is a wonderful thing. But today I'd like to go through first some general mental health principles. I may be preaching to the choir, but if I am, I won't apologize because it's always good to hear this stuff a couple of times so that it'll go deep for you. And then you might be able to then teach somebody else, because the best way to learn something is to teach it. I'm going to talk about some general mental health principles. We'll talk about depression, anxiety, anger, and then try to map that over to the world. Excuse me. I've got an allergy and my voice is playing tricks on me today. Map those mental health principles over to the world of organ donation recipients, family members, and then try to see how that's all been complicated by COVID-19, and then additional complications, concerns we all have over the last few days over the deaths of Black citizens at the hands of white policemen and the protests that have gone on. We all want justice, and we all look around at the minority of people who are causing some of the criminal activity compared to the majority. And I was down there last night, as a matter of fact, to a religious service we had right at the CVS. The vast majority are there for peaceful protest. Anyhow, all this has just complicated everything for all of us. We all have a lot on our minds and our hearts. So let's just start with a couple of main things that therapists and psychologists, doctors, psychiatrists work on when they're working with people who are under stress. Then we'll try to map that over to your world. That makes sense? And then I want to give you some suggestions before we finish up of how you can sort of try to keep yourself sane and keep things straight between your ears up here. It's a real battle sometimes. At least it is for me. as I'm no different from anybody else. I think the first thing that I deal with a lot that probably comes up in your lives or has come up as a challenge is the issue of depression. Think of depression as always meaning loss. When people are depressed, it means something has been lost. It might be big, it might be small. It could be the death of a loved one. It could be moving to a new place. It could be the loss of a job. It certainly can be the loss of health, the loss of a secure feeling about your body and your health. And when something happens like that, it's a loss. There are many, many deaths. That's what we say there. M-A-N-Y, many, many, M-I-N-I, deaths. And that means somebody hadn't died medically, but it's a mini death. It may not be a medical death, but it sure hurts. It's a tremendous loss when you lose your health, when you can't walk, when you can't move, you can't do the same things you used to do, activities that are dear to you, appealing to you, hobbies, whatever it is, when those things are no longer available, it's like a death. It is like a death, and I'll bet many of you are relating to what I'm saying right now. When we have that kind of loss, it's very important to grieve it. We say, if you can feel it, you can heal it. If you can feel it, you can heal it. Losses are like a wound. Say you're out doing some yard work or something and you cut your hand and you got some blood on your hand and maybe a little dirt in the wound and everything. You go inside to the kitchen sink. If you scrub it real hard, it hurts. But if you scrub it with a cloth and soap and get the dirt and everything out, that short-term pain will pay off in the long run because it'll heal, right? You put a bandage over it, clean that wound. However, if you don't want to experience the short-term pain and don't want to scrub it and just slap a Band-Aid on it, what happens? It's going to be infected. And that's what we say with feelings. When you feel it and let the tears out after there's been a loss, and many people have been feeling that in the last few days about the protests and what's going on and some of the damage, as well as people feeling it about COVID-19 and the loss of freedom, perhaps the threat of immune compromised people catching it. It's a very serious thing, and that's a loss. So you think, well, I already had a loss. My family member already had a loss when they had the surgery and the transplant, but now we've got another loss because we can't go out and around. We're afraid that we might contract it, and if we're the patient, we have an immune compromised system, or if we're the family member, we think, oh my gosh, this is terrible. What if I get it and bring it home to this person that I love? Would I feel like I had caused them to be sick? Or even could I cause them to possibly die? These are scary things. And so those are losses, and they're worth crying about. We know that you don't always have to cry, but we know that wet tears are healing. For years, we've known in the field of medicine that tears contain salt. Recent studies show, however, that tears contain hormones. They didn't know that. They didn't know tears contained hormones. And if you're a man, you can ask any woman whether hormones can affect your mood. That's just the wiring in the female gender. And as a matter of fact, now they're studying hormones in men. Sherman, they're trying to figure us out, man. They're trying to figure out whether we got hormones and whether we go through a quote, period, unquote. That's not quite as pronounced in women because their hormones are connected to the survival of the human race, because that's who all of us are born out of, a female. So anyhow, the tears are very healing, and now they're figuring out, well, no wonder people have said, if you grieve something, you feel better because the hormones are being released. Even in Sherman and me, the hormones are coming out. Right, Sherman? Yeah. All right. And so it's very important to acknowledge these losses and to label them as such, and to know it's important to feel it if we're going to heal it. Overall, one of the key principles here, I should have mentioned this before I started, is to always know that thoughts precede feelings. Thoughts cause feelings. And sometimes those thoughts can be so quick, so instantaneous, almost like in a half a second. And we don't even know we're thinking it, but all of a sudden we just feel something. You're just watching TV, and all of a sudden you see something on TV, and all of a sudden your face gets flushed and you think, that makes me mad. I'd like to choke somebody. Or all of a sudden you just feel a flatness and lethargy and sadness. Tears and sadness lives up here in the face, around our eyes and our cheek. That's where sadness lives, in the throat. Anger lives out in the hands. When you clench your hands or you grit your teeth, that's where anger lives. Anxiety lives in the hands as the body gets scared. When we see something that scares us, it could be something scary like a dog that's frothing at the mouth, getting ready to bite us. Or it could be something that's scary like a development in politics, and you start getting scared. It's the same thing. The part of the brain back here, right behind the neck in the lower part, is called the amygdala. Fancy word, Amygdala, amygdala. And that's a hangover from our caveman and cavewoman days, when we would feel fight or flight. If the cavemen, the cavewomen saw a tiger coming into the cave, they would be able to grab that spear and scare them away because they had adrenaline. And the part of the brain that governs fight, flight, the amygdala, would kick into action. Well, nowadays, when we watch TV, there's no tiger, and we don't live in a cave, but the part of the brain doesn't know any better. It doesn't know any different. It still reacts the same way and says, oh my gosh, there's a tiger here, let's kill him. Well, we're just sitting there with that TV clicker in our hand, watching something on TV, but the part of our brain feels like there's a threat. So we get angry or we get scared. And so that happens, even though we live now in modern times. We don't think cavemen and cavewomen had ulcers, because I guess usually if they were mad at somebody, they'd just kill them. There probably wasn't any law enforcement around. But nowadays, we can't do that. We have things called jails. So instead, we hold it all in, and all that fight, flight hormone gets turned inward and eats on us. And so then we develop high blood pressure and headaches and everything else like that sometimes. Not that high blood pressure or headaches are caused by emotional, psychological things. High blood pressure and headaches are often caused just by purely medical, biological processes. Right, Beth? Nurse, we got not a lot of nurses. Maybe Latoya's. How many? We got nurses here? Beth's the nurse. Any others? No? Okay. All right. So that's depression. We have to clean that wound. And if we don't, those feelings that get buried will come out sideways another day. Now, when you're a family member caring for a recipient, you may be vulnerable to what's called compassion fatigue. Compassion fatigue. Nurses get it, doctors get it, psychologists get it, family members of recipients get it, because they get so exhausted caring and taking care of the patient who had the surgery, had the transplant, and it can just wear you out. So the first step is just to know that when you feel like you do not want to get up and do one more thing, you're exhausted, that's okay. That's normal. It's a normal response. If you say, I'm angry, I'm getting tired of it. I know this, my loved one didn't ask for this, but I don't have a life sometimes. And now I'm scared to go outside and catch COVID-19 and bring it back. It'd be normal to feel frustration and anger. It'd be normal to feel fear when you go outside. So just first label that as angry and say, yep, I'm angry. Doesn't mean I don't love them. It doesn't mean I'm not going to do what I need to do to take care of them. But I do have a right to feel some frustration and resentment. Allowing yourself to feel it is very different from acting on it. If we let ourselves feel it and say, yeah, it's normal. I'm not going to go say something I'll regret to them, or I'm not going to tell them they need to do this for themselves when I know that they may not be able to do that. But I am going to have some compassion for myself. Another key thing I want you to leave today's session with is think more in terms of compassion for yourself as a caregiver or as a recipient of an organ. That's something we don't really think about very much. If you were to treat yourself the way you treat another person, if they were telling you they had compassion fatigue, you wouldn't say, oh, you're just selfish. You wouldn't have it if you were the recipient. You should be ashamed. You wouldn't do that. You'd probably support them and say, yeah, that makes sense. We need to do that for ourselves. We need to do that for ourselves, as odd as that sort of sounds. Doesn't mean we're not going to support them. It means we're going to take care of ourselves for a moment and say, yeah, makes sense that I have some compassion fatigue. So that's depression. If we don't express the sadness, by the way, the sadness gets buried. Sadness is normal, but if it gets buried and doesn't get expressed, if you didn't feel it to heal it, it gets buried, and then it gets blown up into a big exaggerated version of sadness, which we rename depression. It looks like sadness, sort of, because we might be lethargic, sleepy, not want to do much, can't concentrate. Looks a lot like sadness, but it's a big exaggerated version called depression. And sometimes, this will really sound strange, the cure for depression is sadness. And what we mean by that, why would we say that? What we mean is that when you have this sadness that gets blown up into this big exaggerated beach ball, much bigger, we call it depression. It's not good. Sadness is good. That's normal. It's a normal response to a loss, remember? Sadness equals a loss, a mini death. But when it doesn't get expressed and dealt with, it gets blown up into this big exaggerated, I think of it as a big beach ball. And when we reach in and allow the sadness to be expressed, the beach ball just deflates. The depression goes away. So that's why we say sadness is the cure for depression. I had a woman come in many, many years ago. She was married to a minister, and he died. And she didn't let herself be sad because she was afraid people in the church would think she wasn't a strong Christian because she was sad. She looked like she didn't have faith that her husband would be fine, that he would be in heaven, or whatever her belief was. So she didn't express her sadness, and she got real depressed. I saw her 3 years after her husband died, a long time after she should have been making more progress. When she came in, I finally convinced her of this idea that sadness causes depression, and she finally started crying for the first time, acknowledging that it was okay and that she could still be a good Christian even if she was really, really down. And once she expressed her sadness, the depression just went away like a vapor, like a mist, a cloud just passed on by. The next feeling we see a lot is, let's see, we've talked about depression, anxiety. Anxiety is about fear. How are we doing on time here, Taylor? Start. Okay. Anxiety is about fear, fear of a future event. And as I said, remember, thoughts precede and cause feelings. When you start telling yourself something scary, we call it catastrophizing. If you take the word catastrophe and you put izing on the end, catastrophizing, it means you're turning something into a catastrophe when it's not yet a catastrophe. In AA, which has great, great sayings, I do a lot of substance abuse work. In AA, they call it stinking thinking. Stinking thinking. And it's not like you're talking to yourself, your lips aren't moving. We call it self-talk, self-talk. And it means what you're thinking. Self-talk can include things like what you're saying in your head, what you're thinking, or pictures in your head, which are even more powerful. You don't even have to pause and say a word. You just see a picture and it elicits a strong reaction. You're watching the news and you see a picture of somebody in your head and you think, oh, that scares me or makes me mad. So we pay a lot of attention to what we're thinking, and we say, you are not your thoughts. They're just thoughts. They're not you. They're just feelings. They're not you. And if you change what you say in your head, if you change your thought, you end up changing the feeling that follows it. And that's really the essence of what therapy is all about, helping people understand that they're causing so much, not all by any stretch, but they're causing a lot of their anxiety and their anger and their sadness by stinking thinking. So I spent a lot of time trying to help people start paying attention to what they're saying in their head, especially if all of a sudden you feel sad or you feel mad or you feel scared. Stop, take a breath, and say, now what am I thinking in my head? And you slow up. And I'm not talking about being schizophrenic or anything like that. It's not like there's two of you. It's you. But in another sense, if you sort of step back and say, what did I just tell myself? What was the movie I was playing in my head? And usually it's a scary movie, or it's a movie that creates anger. Anger, by the way, is about injustice. Think of sadness and depression as basically being about loss of something, which we need to grieve. Think of anxiety as being about fear in the future. And think of anger as being about injustice. It's about something that is just not fair. Anytime you're angry, there'll be some injustice there. So those are the ways to think about those three feelings. And the key is to try to change what you're saying in your head. Quite often it's pretty irrational what we're thinking when we get really scared. And if we can change that, we're thinking, oh, my loved one may not live, or they may get sick, or we'll never get this PICC line cleaned, or we'll just, all these scary thoughts we have about medical conditions, if we can catch ourselves and say, no, wait a minute, I don't know this for sure. This is not a fact. It's just a thought. What can I tell myself that is rational? Don't want to lie to myself, but what can I say that's rational and supported by evidence that's a more positive slant? And if it's rational and you say, yeah, it's true, then you start repeating that. You keep thinking that, and your body will respond. Remember, the body's like soil. The body's like the mind and the body are like soil and dirt. I like to think of it as being sort of like a farmer. If the farmer plants soybean, the soil says, yes, I'll grow soybeans. If the farmer plants corn, what does the soil say? It says, yes, I'll grow corn. If the farmer plants tomatoes, the soil says, yes, I'll grow tomatoes. It grows whatever the farmer plants in the way of seeds. The mind is the same way. If you tell yourself, I will never be able to do this thing, the mind will say, yeah, yep, you're right. However, if you tell yourself, I'll be able to do this, I have hope, I'm not positive, but I have hope in my medical care, in my wellness plan, I have hope that I'll achieve this goal. The mind is going to say, yep, you're right. So think of the mind. I had one guy one time said, you trying to tell me I need to develop a dirty mind? I said, no, I'm just trying to tell you that the mind is like soil and dirt. It'll always say yes. Andrew Carnegie, the famous steel, the guy that brought steel and invented some different kinds of processes for steel, built steel factories, things that were very important in the development of the country. He said, if you think you can do something, or if you think you can't, you're right. If you think you can do something, or if you think you can't, you're right. He's basically saying that the mind is like soil. Nowadays, when we're having all these additional stresses of COVID, we have the risk of what's called post-traumatic stress disorder. Post-traumatic stress lives in the anxiety family. And when something happens that scares us, like say you get into a car accident with an orange Volkswagen, from then on, if you're driving and you see an orange Volkswagen, you'll get that fight-flight response. The amygdala will kick off and say, whoa, watch out. That might hit me, just like that orange Volkswagen did a year ago, put me in the hospital. That's called post-traumatic stress. Post means after. Traumatic means the trauma, meaning the original car accident with the orange Volkswagen, the first time you had the wreck. Post-traumatic stress is the body's response when it starts thinking, oh gosh, here's a tiger coming into the cave. Here's an orange Volkswagen coming down the road again. They're the same thing as far as the brain's concerned. It scares your brain to death and says, I need to do something. That fight-flight response kicks in. We all have it. So that's post-traumatic stress disorder. And when you've had a transplant, when you've had a loved one and you're the family member or the caregiver, any little incident can trigger those memories of that original car accident when that orange Volkswagen hit you. And it elicits the same sort of scary feelings or angry feelings or sad feelings. And we start going, oh, no. We start telling ourselves stinking thinking. And the brain just sort of responds the same way. Now, the brain will respond when you're out driving and you see any Volkswagen. Maybe it's a blue Volkswagen. And the brain says, ooh, that's close enough for me. That's a Volkswagen. And it gets all scared. Or maybe it sees an orange Chevrolet. It's not even a Volkswagen. And the brain says, oh, there's an orange car. Same thing, it hit me, put me in the hospital. That's going to happen. That's post-traumatic stress. We can catch ourselves, and that's the goal, is just to jump in quickly and say, whoa, now wait a minute, brain. Wait a minute, amygdala, fight, flight center. That's an orange Volkswagen, or it's an orange Chevrolet, or it's a blue Volkswagen, but that doesn't mean it's going to hit me and put me in the hospital again. I'll be okay. Chances are good it's not going to hit you again. And the chances of it hitting you again twice are pretty low. It's like being struck by lightning. Anybody here been struck by lightning? Okay, good. So that's post-traumatic stress. So you've already got that in your medical life or the medical life of your loved one. Now we have the COVID-19 threat, and that could again be another orange Volkswagen, reminding us of our initial medical trauma that we went through. So know that it's perfectly normal if COVID-19 has brought up some of those old bad feelings from the past. And then we throw in the murder of young Black and the participation of these white police officers and the press and the press and the demonstrations and all of that, even though it's not about a transplant, could still elicit deep, strong feelings of anxiety or fear or sadness or anger. And that's post-traumatic when we watch TV. So you start feeling bad and you think, why am I feeling bad? Well, what's happened, these deaths, they're terrible. And it makes you just start thinking, oh my gosh, this reminds me of something terrible I went through before. Doesn't even have to be medical surgery in your life, but it's traumatic. So just know that when that happens, it's perfectly normal. And you can tell yourself, okay, it is sad and it's scary. I'm going to leave it at that. And I will allow myself to feel sad or scared, but I'm going to feed myself more positive thoughts and hope in the good people, like the people that were out there yesterday morning in downtown Raleigh, cleaning the street, and just brought tears to my eyes. Okay. I want to make sure I leave enough time for questions here, Taylor.
Yeah, that's great. If you could go into just a few little tips and tricks for kind of dealing with those things, and then we have some questions. So.
Okay. One of the related ideas is loneliness in this COVID-19 chapter we're in. People are feeling real lonely, trapped in the house. And we know there's a study from Harvard that said they studied a lot of people who are isolated and lonely. And they concluded that living in a very lonely way, if you don't have people to talk to, is the equivalent of 15 cigarettes a day or 5 alcoholic drinks. In other words, loneliness is not good for our bodies medically. So we have to spend time on the phone, call people, FaceTime. If you don't know how to do FaceTime on your phone, get some 12-year-old to show you. It's pretty simple. If somebody like I can do it, it's simple because I'm an IT moron. So yeah, loneliness is very important. We're all like logs in the fireplace, right? And a log in the fireplace is just going to flame up. You take it out and put it on the hearth. What happens? About 20 minutes, it'll be almost gone. And you put it back in the fire, and what happens? It lights up again. That's what we are. We're all logs. We got to be around other logs. It's just the way we're built. And so it's very important to arrange time with other people. You got to make sure you do your wellness plan. If you're walking, if you ask me, okay, Anderton, what's the one thing I can do for my mental health? I would say it's not mental. I would say if you can only do one thing, exercise. It's a domino that will knock over a lot of other dominoes. It doesn't have to be exercise, big deal. It could just be 10 minutes or 15 minutes of walk down to the corner and back. But get outside, wear a mask if you have to, or you should. And I always feel better with a mask even outside. And get a little exercise. It'll make you sleep better. It'll make you proud of yourself. Back in the days when I played sports, we used to have a rule when you were working out or training, don't stop until you're proud. Don't stop until you're proud. Sedentary lifestyle is called nowadays the new smoking. A sedentary lifestyle is the new smoking. It's that dangerous medically. And when people say they're busy, just don't have time for exercise, I always say, well, what fits into your busy schedule better? Exercising 30 minutes a day or being dead 24 hours a day? That's, I stole that from a card my doctor has on his wall. Every time I go see him, I look at that thing and I think, oh, I need to start exercising more. Take some breaks from watching the news. Give yourself a mental health diet. If you watch too much, it's like the stinking thinking. It's what you'll be playing on the movie screen in your mind. Everybody's mind's got a movie screen. What movies are you playing? If you went to the worst movie you ever went to in your life, would you keep going to it once a week for the next half year? Of course not. You probably wouldn't even go back to it a second time. But when we're scaring ourselves to death with stinking thinking, we're playing that same old terrible movie over and over like a broken record, and we wonder why the day just feels sort of bad. We just don't feel satisfaction. You know, that you don't feel terrible, but you just think, gosh, I just don't feel good. I just don't feel good. I'm not talking about medically, but I'm talking up here between our ears. So we have to watch what we're playing ourselves, or the movie we're playing. All right, Taylor, whatever your name is. I can't hear you. Have I lost you guys?
No, I'm here. Sorry.
Okay.
I'd muted everyone so that we could hear you. Yes, yeah, don't keep it professional, Dad. Don't let him know I have a nickname. So Victoria, I'm going to unmute you. She has written in some questions that I think are great. And then y'all feel free. You can either type them in and I can read them, or you are welcome to, raise your hand and read them yourself.
Hi, thanks for speaking with us. This is a really great.
Thank you, Victoria.
My first comment was just a statement that I was agreeing with when you were talking about self-care. I think it's really important that we do, because when we are caregivers, we forget about ourselves a lot because we're so focused on the people who need our care. And so I do agree, and I think it's best that we have to keep that in mind and be proactive about it and not reactive, because by the time we get into troubles ourselves, it's hard to turn ourselves around.
Yes. Yeah, excellent point. We have to learn to have an early detector that can tell us when we're getting tired emotionally, physically tired, or even frustrated. And sometimes it's called, Victoria, the disease to please. It's an occupational hazard for people that have strong religious faith. They get the disease to please, and they overdo it, and it backs up on them. It's like they're carrying a gunny sack around, and they keep doing it, but they're frustrated. Instead of dealing with their frustration and accepting it, or setting a limit with someone you're caring for about something that they can do and that you shouldn't have to always do it, you stuff that anger in that gunny sack, and then sometimes we get so frustrated we just hit them with that gunny sack, and they wonder where all that's coming from. They think, my goodness, what did I do? And the caregiver has been living the disease to please, and they've buried their frustrations instead of being assertive and saying, well, I'd be glad to help you do this, but I really feel like you can do that, and I need to run some errands. I can't stay here all the time. I need to have a life. Matter of fact, if I have a life, you'll be better off because I, as your caregiver, will do a better job. So it's a paradox.
Yeah. And I liked what you said about stinking thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And and I can recognize when I'm in it, maybe not right away, but eventually. But one of the questions I had is that when we're going through a lot of issues, and so my daughter had a liver transplant, and she had a lot of complications. And so whenever we would take a step forward, sometimes we'd take 5 steps back. And to go up and down like that was so hard. So that to take the good news and then know that after that there's something else that went wrong. And I know that, it's just that it was so hard. I felt like I had to protect myself or something, to not think too positive when something goes well, because I know it could easily turn around.
Yes.
So what do you recommend? How can I best, try to address that and still be positive, but not, I just couldn't take the low so hard.
Yes, yes. Well, that's a great question. It's balance is the key. Um, it is important to be positive. I think without hope, we have nothing. We have to have hope. And yet at the same time, we human beings, we don't like surprises. And sometimes people who adjust their expectations a little bit, they don't get as disappointed. I'm not saying become a pessimist, but we do have to be realistic. And if we can adjust our expectations, keep our hope, but when the 5 steps backward occurs, we have to quickly jump in and say, okay, here we go again. This is post-traumatic stress. This reminds me, this is the 3rd or 12th time this has happened, but I have to feed myself healing thoughts, that we believe in our caregiver, our medical, believe in our medical, can everybody still hear me okay? Okay. Believe in my medical care. And also, I didn't mention this before, but I think everybody has to have some sort of spiritual life. I think without a spiritual life, our soul dries up. I'm not talking about church necessarily, or even God, depending on your belief. You may believe, you may not believe, but we still all have to deal with who we are in this universe and find some way to have meaning and purpose and remind ourselves of that which is good, true, and beautiful. And if we can sort of cling to that, then when those 5 steps come back, first we cry. If you thought this was going to finally make a difference, and all of a sudden it's another 5 steps backwards, that's a mini loss, and we have to let the tears out. I may want to do it separately, not around your care receiver. Maybe they need to cry because they're feeling the same thing. But the more we face it, the more we can say, okay, this is a loss. Tomorrow's another day. We're not going to give up hope. To feed yourself that healing thought. And the other thing, Victoria, this goes back into this key concept. I really want you to get this today, everybody, if you can, is having compassion for yourself. You're basically almost having compassion for your own sadness, the way you would someone else. So instead of getting mad at yourself because you got your hopes up, you think, oh, I should have kept my hopes down, then I wouldn't be disappointed. Well, I can't keep my hopes down because that's negative. That's a bad movie. Got to put my hopes up. Instead of judging yourself, just have compassion for yourself and say, of course I'm sad. We had hopes this time, and look, here's 5 steps backwards again. How many times can we have this? And you say, yeah, I deserve to feel sad. I have compassion for myself. And when your care receiver is upset or angry, you think, yep, they're experiencing a feeling of injustice. We have to put up with all this, and we have all our friends, and we watch TV, and all these people that just sort of have an attitude where they don't have to worry about this stuff. This is not fair. You allow yourself to feel that, and it'll pass. It'll pass then. If we don't let ourselves feel it, it's like we're resisting it. And the harder you push on anything, what happens? It pushes back. And
Thank you.
yes.
Mary, do you have a question? We can't see you, but I think we should be able to hear you.
Sorry about the video.
Oh, no worries.
Mine was not so much a question as just a response that once upon a time I read a very brief post that someone had put at one of the transplant survivor groups at Facebook, and she had gone to the doctor with her husband or something, and the doctor looked at her and he said, "How are you?" And she said that meant so much that he didn't automatically look at the patient and say, how are you doing? He looked at her and said, how are you doing? And I think a lot of times as ambassadors, as recipients, as donor families or something, we should look at the caregiver first and say, you know, how are you doing? You know, I'll find out about this patient in a minute. We're going to go in depth over here, but for right now, how are you? And I think it takes a little bit off that caregiver to say, you know, I'm okay, thanks, you know, and it just gets them in that positive vibe to allow themselves to express, you know, how they are feeling, how they are doing. And that way, you know, if they're not feeling great, if they're feeling okay, but really not great, they're kind of tired, it kind of gives them a positive boost. And if they are feeling really bad, you know, it gives them the opportunity to say, oh, the last couple of days, life just sucks, you know,
Yeah.
and get some of that out. And I thought that was just awesome when I read that. And I think that very often we do look at the patient and how is the patient doing, and we forget to look at the caregiver and say, how are you doing?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mary. That's all very true. And it also helps the patient be reminded that they need to appreciate the caregiver.
Yes, very much.
Maybe the most fundamental emotional, psychological need we human beings have is the need to feel heard and understood.
Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what all these riots are about.
Yes.
Down in Charlotte the other day, they were praising the cops because the cops were not letting the crowds get to them. And some of the people were just walking up to the cops and just talking. You know, they said, that's all we want is to be heard.
Right.
And then the police just stood there and, you know, listened to them and tried to converse with them. Then some outsiders got in and started getting people incited, and, you know, and it took off after that. But, you know, they were given a lot of recognition to the cops in Charlotte for not trying to respond in a physical way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just keep it as a peaceful protest.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Thank you. And also anyone else that has comments as opposed to questions, always interested in that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Most of you, I think, are unmuted unless you've muted yourself. I've unmuted. So if anyone wants to jump in, if anyone has anything.
Yeah. Any comments, anything that sort of reminded you of something you've been through? We don't need a question necessarily.
Well, if I may, this is Sherman. I would like to just to share some of the things that you were talking about, which I think are very important. And having a transplant and living through this experience has really enlightened me onto many things. And one of the things that I did not have is a compassion for myself. I never expressed to cry because I felt being a man, it was going to make me feel like I was weak. But going through it, I realize now that it's perfectly okay to be able to cry as a man, because those feelings that we have within inside of us, they're there. We just have to release them. And the thing that I have done by visiting, I do peer visitation over at Baptist Hospital every Monday, and this was before the COVID-19 came in. And that's one of the things that I've had a lot of opportunity to talk to, mainly the men, is that when I'm in the room and I'm speaking with them, and then all of a sudden they start crying, and then they're going to become very apologetic. And I'll tell them, you don't owe no one an apology. Absolutely not. You do not owe not one single person. If this is something that you got to do, go ahead and do it. And as long as I'm in the room, you can cry as long as you need to, and as much as you need to, because I want you to be able to release those feelings, to be able to express them in a way that you don't feel as being comfortable. And so I think that is wonderful to be able to say that, yes, men, it is okay to cry. But, you know, growing up, we've always been told you got to be strong, you know, you got to be, you can't be weak, you can't show any type of weakness. And so we take on this as our attitude, and we live this. And so we're very hard, but I think that is very, very important. But the other thing that I also talk to them about is that self-talk. That's one of the things that I have discovered that is the most vital thing, is learning how to control your inner thoughts. You have to learn to interrupt them. And my sister, when I was in the hospital, she brought pictures of my family there because I was in a state of depression for a little while. And by her bringing those pictures, I could look at the pictures, the same pictures, but each time I look at them, I could get a different feeling about my child, my kids, my grandkids, my mother, father. And that way it interrupted those thoughts, those negative thoughts. And I began to learn how to maximize interruption of my thoughts. And then it was absolute, for me, it was very powerful because then I could turn myself around. I knew how to be motivating myself, how to pull myself up when I got low. And that's the thing that I do now, is I try to tell all the patients, hey, get pictures of your family, bring your dogs, bring your cats, whatever is something important to you, to interrupt those thoughts while you're sitting here in this room, because a lot of nights you're there by yourself, nobody's in there, and the walls start coming in on you. And so by having a way to interrupt those thoughts really makes a difference and can help lift your spirits, that you may be able to overcome the challenges that you're faced with. So those are some of the things. And again, appreciate you taking the time to share that with us. And again, they're very powerful because I've utilized them.
Thank you. That's beautiful, Sherman. You know, there's a subtle little distinction. I'm going to give you a little more credit. Somebody could have shown you those pictures. It's not like the pictures interrupt your thoughts. Mm-hmm. You interrupt your thoughts by looking at them, because some people could look at those pictures and say, I take the pictures away, they're making me feel worse. Right. So the pictures interrupted your thoughts in a sense, and yet in another sense, Sherman did the interrupting. He just used the pictures as the, yeah. So I want to give you credit for that, because we have all the power, and sometimes pictures won't do it.
Yeah, exactly.
You did it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions or thoughts? And if not, yeah, go ahead.
I will agree with the part that he was talking about the spiritual connection, and a lot of people will say, oh, you know, going on a more personal experience, you know, oh, does being a Christian, you know, help you? Does it make you better? Do you feel better because you're a Christian? Not always. Being a Christian doesn't, or being spiritual does not change the situation really, but it changes how you feel about the situation. Yes. It gives you that hope. It gives you that that faith in something, that things will improve. And I think that's a lot of, you know, relieving a lot of the stress is just, you know, at the end of the day, today was a bad day, but there's going to be tomorrow now. And as a recipient, you know, it used to be, today was a bad day, I hope tomorrow's not worse. And now it's, today was a bad day, tomorrow's going to be a great day. You know, I'm going to make it a great day. And that, I think that's, you know, one of the things that we have to look at as recipients and as caregivers, because if you're, you know, if your patient is feeling better, you're going to feel a little better.
Yeah. That's so true. I have a lot of people from different religions in my practice, and so I'm sensitive to Jewish people, have some Muslims, but the majority of Christians, since this is North Carolina, that's demographically the predominant religion. There's a great verse, Mary, I love Romans 12, verse 2. Romans 12, verse 2. It's, do not be overcome by evil, but be ye transformed by the renewal of your thoughts. And Paul was writing this letter to the Christians in Rome who were just fighting and fussing and feuding over everything, no different from today. And the Greek word for thoughts, Paul says, be ye transformed by the renewal of your thoughts, like Sherman was just talking about. The word for thoughts is very much almost identical to our word in English for self-talk. So Paul was a good psychologist. He understood that change begins with what we think. We must pay attention to what we think, because what we think about will grow. What we think about will grow. So another good verse in Philippians, I think 4, I've got it written down somewhere. Paul said, whatsoever is beautiful, whatsoever is true, whatsoever is noble, whatsoever is of service to others, whatsoever is kind, think about these things. Think about these things. So once again, he didn't say whatsoever is good, whatsoever is true, whatsoever is noble. Go out and exercise about these things or feel about these things. He said, think about these things, because he knew that the movies we play in our head are going to determine whether we change, folks. And like Mary said, it's going to determine whether we have a good day or not. Because when you can change your feelings, when you have the ability to change your feelings, you're like somebody who can change their own flat tire out in the country. You're by yourself. You can change your own flat tires. You're covered. You're covered. It's like Mark Twain used to say, he said, this guy in town, he said, the man had the confidence of a Christian holding 5 aces. So when you can change your feelings, you got a real asset. And that's what we call mentally healthy, because nobody feels good all the time. Carolyn. Or somebody thought Carolyn's screen went up.
Oh, I do want to say something. And I love how you've given us these things like disease to please.
Yeah.
Stinking thinking.
Yeah.
Just going back to Paul, I mean, that's a long time ago, and it's so true for today. And
Yeah.
don't stop until you're proud.
Right. Yeah, that's what my coach used to say. He said, don't stop until you're proud, guys. Keep
And
going.
I love comparing the mind body like soil and dirt. I mean, it's just, it's right there.
Yeah. We've all got a dirty mind.
And we must grieve.
That's
Yes,
right.
we must grieve.
That's right. Hormones.
We need to remember, though, that everybody grieves differently.
That's right.
So we just have to be patient.
That's right. You have to be patient. The body is wired to grieve through wet tears. That's the theory, because of the hormonal release. But not everybody grieves the same way. And some people cry inside, but they don't have moisture. So we just have to be accepting, and one size doesn't fit all.
That's another good statement.
Good.
Well, thank you, Dr. Anderton, Dad. I appreciate this. We've got some good stuff. Also, I didn't clear this with you beforehand, but I made the executive decision and we recorded this, so we will have this to share. I hope that's okay, Pop. But thank you for this. We really appreciate it and appreciate your time.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you all for paying such good. Thank you, Victoria.
Thank
Thank
you,
you
sir.
for being with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I'm glad to do it. I love this stuff. You want me to come back? I'll come back tomorrow at 4 p.m. I love it.
It's true.
My wife and this is just barely getting into it for me. I got a lot of other stuff. I'll be glad to come back. Thank you very much.
We'll schedule you again, Pop.
Tomorrow.
Thank you, Dad.
Talk about Taylor.
Yeah.
We don't. Yeah.
I think I need a little bit more time to do that. That would take a lot more time.
Oh, thanks, Pop. We appreciate it.
All right. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye, Dad.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Well, so that's, now you've all met my dad. All righty. We have a couple more things on the agenda that we want to jump in on. And Beth, I think you've got some stuff to share next.
Yes. We are going to do, because of COVID-19 and a lot of the DMV offices are closed across North Carolina, but the ones that are open, we thought about doing something for them. And so we're going to do a social media plan that could involve you guys if you would like to participate. And it would be something as simple as, we're going to write out a message. It's going to be 12 blocks, and I'll try to pull it up here on the screen to show you guys what the picture would look like, so you can kind of see what we're talking about. But New England Organ Bank, they did a thank you because of everything that's going on now, and each person held up a part of a message. And so we want to send a thank you to the DMV examiners, and we would love your participation to be a part of one of the sayings. So we're going to break it down. Instead of having, and I believe they had like 20 people involved in this picture, and to us, that's a lot to be reading. We're going to break it down into 12 sayings that, like, 12 people will have their photo made, and they'll hold a piece of paper that says one part of the message. And we're going to make that into a postcard and send to the DMV examiners, just thanking them, the ones that are continuing to work during this uncertain time, and asking that question every day about becoming an organ and tissue donor, how important that still is for us, because for the waiting list, you know, the waiting list isn't on hold right now. The waiting list is continuing. People are being added to that waiting list every day. And we want to make sure in North Carolina that everyone who goes into the DMV office has that opportunity to say yes to donation. And so I wanted to let you guys know about this on the Zoom call today, to see if it would be something you'd want to participate in. I will reach out to you guys, my volunteers I see on the screen, to ask personally, do you want to be involved in this? And Taylor and LaToya will have volunteer participation as well. But wanted to let you guys know that this is something that we want to start pretty soon, putting together, getting the photo of a volunteer holding up a piece of the message so we can get it sent to our DMV examiners as soon as possible. So wanted to talk to you guys about this today, since we have you guys on Zoom, and just let you know that this is something we want to do, because, you know, like I said, it's uncertain times, but those examiners are going in every day in the offices that are open, and they're working, and we just want them to know how appreciative we are of asking that question. So there'll be more to come with this, but I was so excited to kind of bring it to you guys who are on the call today, just to let you know that this would be something that's coming up real soon. So be looking for another message coming out about that. But I think it's something really easy that those that want to participate, we can put together real quick.
Count me in.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm sure Rodney will do it.
Great.
I'll do whatever I can from wherever I can.
Yes,
You guys are awesome.
All right, LaToya, you're up.
All right, so the next topic, I'm gonna briefly discuss it because we're still working through some things with the decision project, but it's a work in progress. And basically the decision project is a partnership with our state team, Donate Life North Carolina, in which we work with underserved, multicultural, minority communities within our DSAs to basically do as we do now, empower people to make educated decisions about becoming a registered organ, eye, and tissue donor, and to briefly talk to you guys about one thing that I have already done that fell under the Decision Project umbrella during our pandemic time. I did a food drive, and the food drive that I held here within Greenville and our areas that we're covering, because we're basically focused on 3 areas. For me, it's Greenville. For Taylor, it would be Durham, and for Beth, it would be Greensboro. But here in Greenville, I did a food drive in which I partnered with the Food Bank of Central and Eastern North Carolina, but also pantries that we have around the city within certain communities in Greenville. And within these communities, it's underserved communities where people are in need. The homeless shelter is within these communities, and the pantry boxes that are located around is people go in, they fill it up with food, and shockingly, no one has went in and just taken all the food out or like goes in and steal all of it. People go in and make sure that it's kept full and kept packed for that community, and that community only goes to that box and opens it up for things that they need for that day. So I put in canned food items, snacks, water, just different things throughout the week. But the food drive was held at different locations for 4 days. Of course, I had to take safety measures due to the pandemic. It was a drive-through food drive. I had to be gloved. I was masked, and people kept their stuff in bags, and everything was boxed so that I would be able to sanitize it before I took it to their respective places. But items like that falls under what is called a decision project, food drives, community or neighborhood events, faith-based outreach, which still ties in to us and to the decision projects, and also attending community meetings. And it's basically a way where we're building partnerships within these underserved communities to let them see us as a resource, that we're not only registering donors, because there is a great need for more minority donors, but also so that they can see that we're there to help as well. So more information about that project will start to unfold within the coming months. And as we have the Zoom calls, I will be providing more information about it as it unfolds.
And as you guys, if you guys hear of anything that sounds like it might be a good fit, let us know. Come to us, because we are looking for new ways. I mean, as you can imagine, we canceled a lot of events, a lot of speaking engagements, and we're still wanting to reach our communities. And so LaToya has been very creative, and we're all just looking to reach people. And sometimes that's going to them where they are, or providing them resources, in addition to just donation education. Thanks for that, LaToya. Beth, you want to talk about our big new tech change?
Yeah, we're going to move, our organization is moving to Microsoft Teams with Carolina's IT, who is our IT company that works with us, that fixes problems and things like that. We're all moving towards Microsoft Teams within Carolina Donor Services. And so it was asked of us if we could move these calls to Microsoft Teams. And so you guys may have gotten an email alert that you were added to Microsoft Teams. I believe a couple people reached out. I think Judy reached out to Taylor that she got an alert, but you will see that. I have been able to enter everyone's email address into Microsoft Teams for the West, which is my region, Central, which would be the volunteers in Taylor's area, and then the eastern part of the state, LaToya's volunteers. I've entered in the email addresses Microsoft Teams. We are just now starting to learn this ourselves, so Taylor and LaToya and I would love for anyone who would like to volunteer to kind of be a test guinea pig with us. If we email you to say, hey, we have a meeting coming up. It's not really going to be a meeting, but we just want to make sure it's working fluently before we have our next presentation 2 weeks from now, 2 weeks from now on a Monday. We want to make sure that we've gone through all the kinks and fixed all the bugs or anything that needed to be worked out. So we wanted to present this to you guys on this call to see if anybody wanted to be a test guinea pig to work with us. We would love to take your name and then move forward from there. But
Or if you want to think about it and shoot us an email later, we also will probably stalk everyone asking for volunteers. We promise we won't, we're going to keep it as simple on you guys as possible. It will probably just be like a log into this. We make sure we can see and hear everyone and it's working, and then log out. We won't take up your time.
yeah.
Okay.
And it won't be at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning when we're asking these requests. It will be during.
Oh, darn. I won't be awake then.
6 a.m. every Saturday morning, as long as that works.
But I know that Zoom, we've gotten very comfortable using this Zoom, and we hated to throw this a new change, but it was kind of told to us everybody's moving towards Microsoft Teams. Could you guys
Right.
transition as well, since we're wanting to take this through the summer with these presentations? And then, like Taylor mentioned earlier, with canceling of events and things, what will the next several months look like for us? We want to stay as close to you guys as possible. And I'm so thankful to see all the faces today. I actually missed you guys from, you know, my computer was the one messed up last time. So I love seeing everybody. So, you know, we want to continue this type of interaction with you guys because we want to stay engaged as much as possible through all of this. So that's something that's new that's coming up. We hated to throw it on you guys, but like I said, we're having to transition as well to Microsoft Teams. So we're learning just like you guys. So